So this talk is called PhD's Experience Relativity. It doesn't work. And here's the person, Dr. Cynthia Whitney. She's got a PhD from MIT and in physics and relativity, and she's now a critic of relativity. The group I'm with, John Chappell Natural Philosophy Society, has various different people who have looked at relativity and decided it's wrong. So this is Dr. Cynthia Whitney's personal story. Something extremely fateful happened in 1957. The Russians launched their Sputnik satellite. I was in high school, planning to grow up to be an artist, but also enjoying everything else that high school had to offer. One of the other things was physics. The nation had somewhat anticipated some such challenge from Russia and had created the Physical Science Study Committee, so our school had already had wonderful teachers and courses and other opportunities for potential scientists. After Sputnik, I decided to try for physics at MIT. At the time that was crazy, because probably there were so few women in physics. But I applied and I got an early acceptance, so I went there in 1959. There were 19 or 20 women in my entering class of a little over 900. People did come and go all the time, and I think she means people took the course and then suddenly they found it too hard and gave up. So people came and went all the time. And then she says to herself, but I didn't go away, so she stuck at the course. Something else fateful had happened in 1959. That handsome senior named Dan Whitney had gotten behind me in the checkout line at the MIT bookstore, so she's going on about her romance now. So by late 1967 I had SB in physics, SM in EE and PhD in mathematical physics, so she got her physics degree, plus my wonderful husband, so she got married and our first baby, David. It was time to get a real job, but most places really did discriminate against women, especially mothers, so hard time getting a job being a mother. So MIT Draper Laboratory didn't discriminate so much, so I tried out there. The interviewer presented a ring laser gyroscope, a technology based on the Shannon effect, described the occasional operational problems that it presented, and asked me what I thought. I had done my PhD thesis in SRT, which stands for Special Relativity Theory, and I thought special relativity could surely reveal something about the ring laser gyroscope's problems. So Draper Lab asked me to give it a try. Dr. Cynthia Whitney then goes on to say, now the fact is, this Shannon effect is fatal to special relativity, as presently practiced. Draper people already knew that, and I soon knew it too, and that is how I became a dissident physicist. So she found out special relativity didn't work for the gyroscope. I wouldn't describe things in the terms that she used. As I explained in my many other previous videos, what happens is that whenever there's a problem in relativity, goalposts are moved, and that saves relativity, i.e. it gets revised. It's sort of like a bodging process where the math is bodged and then set to fit experiments. Dr. Cynthia Whitney carries on. Here is a short list of things that I think are wrong with special relativity as presently practiced. 1. We all learned in high school geometry that it is appropriate to list all assumptions fully, up front, as postulates. Did Einstein really do that? And she answers it, not exactly. With his second postulate, he allowed that the speed of light is c relative to all inertial observers, but he didn't make clear that he was assuming that condition over the entire propagation path all the way back from the observer to the source. I think we should acknowledge fully that this truly bald assumption it is so bald that it amounts to over-constraint, and that is what causes conflicts and paradoxes. Now in my videos I talk about this sort of thing. For example, in my video called Light Speed Constancy is ambiguous, referred to there, I dealt with what's supposed to be meant by light speed constantly and point out it's ambiguous. Dr. Cynthia Whitney goes on to point 2, and she says, we all learned in college math that there is a reliable routine for using differential equations, their families of eigensolutions, and our particular boundary conditions. Did Einstein really apply any of that? And she answers that not really. The light propagation problem has two boundaries, the source and the observer. Einstein used only the observer. Later on, Ritz used only the source, and that clearly didn't work correctly for stellar aberration. So the world settled on the Einstein's choice and his resulting special relativity. Nobody, it seems, has yet used both boundaries. I think we should use both boundaries. How about a simple straight line transition of light speed reference from the source to the observer? Question mark. So what she's talking about is she's saying the mathematics of relativity is a mess, and I've dealt with that in several of my videos where I point out there's a lot of fudging going on in the mathematics when it's used in physics. Dr. Cynthia then goes on to point 3. We all learned in professional life that every kind of control system has one or more feedback loops. The control system collects whatever data it can get and updates whatever commands it can give in order to better adhere to some desired objective. Did Einstein ever do anything like that? Question mark. And she answers no, not at all. He did special relativity 1 week, and he introduced the photon for quantum mechanics a different week, and so far as I know never issued updates for special relativity based on his photon. I think his friends advised against any updates on anything ever, since making any update might seem like acknowledging an earlier weakness. Now, I pointed out in several of my videos that Einstein did do updates, but really he says these things in a very confusing way. He doesn't make things very clear when he's making changes. The usual one I point out is that in Einstein 1905 he was saying the ether was superfluous, but in 1920 he seems to be saying there is an ether. I use the word seems because it's very hard to make sense of what he means. His writing's never very lucid. It's all very ambiguous. One of my videos on ether is ether in Einstein's 1905 special relativity paper at that link, where I try to make sense out of the obscure things Einstein says about ether in 1905. And you go through the other papers by Einstein, and they're all very confusing as well. Anyway, going on with what Dr. Cynthia Whitney thinks, but I think making updates actually displays strength, and so we ought to pursue them. They are at the heart of modern philosophy of science. That discipline teaches us that science frozen is not science at all, it is just dogma. Science is supposed to allow review, admit deficiencies, acknowledge occasional crises, and welcome proposed updates for further testing, preferably by real physical experiments, although testing for logical consistency isn't a bad idea either. Consider the modern computer software industry. There are user reports, developer responses, and software updates all the time. I think the physics enterprise needs to become more like the software enterprise. So what she's really doing is she's saying she wants relativity revised, which she then goes on to talk about in more detail, which I shall pass. Dr. Cynthia Whitney then goes on to say, postscript, my PhD thesis supervisor, Tizza, remained a lifelong friend. He had known that physics was beset with many problems, but he had thought that special relativity at least was a safe place when he sent me onto it. He wasn't very surprised when I later became a dissident about special relativity. He lived to be 102 and never ceased to have an open and expanding mind. So her supervisor knew there were lots of problems with physics. So the problems don't just stop with relativity. It's the rest of physics is really a big mess as well. And that's the end. But I really should point out that people like Dr. Cynthia Whitney, when they get taught relativity at university, what they experience is that they're not told of any problems with relativity. So what they're presented with as just seems like it's no problems with it. They're taught relativity. They're not told there's any problems with relativity, so they assume there are no problems with relativity. In the case, though, of Dr. Cynthia Whitney, when she then goes on to use special relativity in experiments, she finds it doesn't work. And there's quite a few people who find that. Physics is a mess in relativity and other areas.